Before there were cruise ships, sea travel existed because it was necessary. Ships were built for function, not leisure. They transported mail, cargo, and people that were relocating or working. Comfort was not a concern, only how fast and how reliable the ships were. Sea travel was practical, and ships were a tool, not an experience. Travel by sea was not optional. It was the only way to cross long distances. People didn't choose to sail on a ship based on the entertainment or the amenities like we do today. They had no other choice but to travel by sea. Comfort was minimal at best. The conditions on board varied by your social class. The space was limited and privacy was a rarity. The journey itself was very demanding. This was normal. This was expected, and nobody called it a vacation. Yeah. The shift from purely functional ships to more comfortable ones happened when shipping companies realized three things. Passenger travel was profitable. They were already crossing the ocean to transport mail and cargo, so taking on passengers brought in an additional source of revenue. And once people became paying customers, their experience actually started to matter. This was a change not only to an industry, but it was a mindset shift. Passengers were no longer just being transported, they were being served. Competition forced shipping companies to differentiate their services. They could no longer compete on just speed and reliability alone. They had to have something else. So they began to compete on better accommodations, better meals, and more pleasant onboard experiences. Comfort became a business decision, not a moral one. Longer journeys made comfort a necessity. Ocean crossings took days to weeks depending on the destination. Modest improvements were made to make the passengers more comfortable, things like better seating, more private spaces or more semi-private spaces, and structured meals. Even though this seems basic and minimal, it made a noticeable difference in how the journey felt. Comfort didn't appear because travel became leisure. People were paying to endure long journeys, and endurance has its limits. That early focus on passenger comfort, as minimal as it was, is what set the groundwork for cruising as we know it today. So, despite these early improvements, sea travel in the 19th century was still an incredibly harsh experience. It was in the 19th century that a shift from occasional sea crossings to regularly scheduled ocean travel started to occur. Steamships allowed for more predictable voyages and more frequent ones as well. They were less dependent on the weather, so they were not limited to when they could sail. Sea travel became part of the industrial world, not just for exploration or trade. This wasn't a rare experience anymore, it was becoming very routine. While passenger travel expanded, comfort did not. Ships were able to carry more passengers, go longer distances, and on tighter schedules, but the priority for the ship design was still focused on efficiency. Capacity and cost control. So just because a ship was faster did not mean that the journey itself was easier. The ship is reliable, but that doesn't equal passenger care. Progress was measured in output, not in experience. The system improved, but the experience didn't. Class division was built into the ship. Passenger class wasn't just about the price. It was how you were treated. Your class determined where you slept, where you ate, how much space you had, and whether you had any privacy at all. These class divisions were intentional, structural, and designed into the ship itself. Comfort existed, but not for everyone. The reality of long voyages was that they required a lot of endurance, patience, and physical and mental resilience. The ocean decided the pace, the conditions, and daily life. The journey shaped the people, not the other way around. Endurance was expected. The voyages, lasting days to weeks at a time, passengers had to adapt. There was limited space, constant motion, and unpredictable conditions. Sea travel required endurance, not enjoyment. People didn't board ships expecting comfort. They expected just to get through it. Conditions on board varied drastically based on your class. The higher class passengers experienced private or semi-private cabins. They had better meals and access to fresh air and common spaces. The lower class had to endure crowded sleeping quarters, and they had limited privacy. They had limited control over their own daily lives. The ocean was shared, but the experience was not. The ship was the master of daily life. Passengers were assigned schedules. Their movements were restricted, and they had to follow rules that they didn't set. They couldn't change these conditions or escape the environment. Once they were on the journey, there was no alternative. This way of travel was normal. There was nothing unusual about it. It was just how long distance travel worked. People accepted the hardships as part of the journey. Hardship wasn't a failure, it was just the cost of crossing the ocean. This system worked, but at a cost. Ships succeeded at moving people across the ocean, but they did so at expecting people to endure it. The experience was functional, not humane. The system was efficient, but it asked a lot of the people inside of it. As sea travel became more common, the problems became more evident. There were more people experiencing this harsh reality and conditions, and what once felt as something that was unavoidable began to feel questionable. The limits of endurance became harder to ignore. What people once accepted quietly was much more difficult to justify at scale. This reality forced change. The conditions of 19th century travel created pressure, not moral outrage, just practical pressure. If ships were going to carry more passengers more often, then something had to change. By the start of the 20th century, it was clear that this system could not remain as it was. As the 20th century began, the world was moving faster. Industry was accelerating, cities were expanding, global movement was increasing, and long distance travel was becoming more common, not exceptional. Sea travel was no longer rare or extraordinary, it was merely becoming routine. Passenger expectations were quietly shifting. People still accepted the reality of long journeys, but they were increasingly expecting more. They wanted more order, more cleanliness, and more predictability. Endurance alone was no longer enough. It was a psychological shift. People stopped asking, will we arrive? And started asking, how will we live while we're on board? Ships started to change, but it was slow. Changes were incremental, uneven across ships and classes, but they were intentional. Interiors were becoming more thoughtfully arranged. There were areas that were designated for public spaces, and there was greater attention to passenger routines. Ships were beginning to be designed for people, not just for passage. Comfort was now a design consideration and no longer just accidental. It was planned, tested, and adjusted. Ships began to acknowledge time spent on board, human limits, and the lived experience of travel. The ship itself was becoming an environment, not just a vessel. These early changes marked the beginning of a very different relationship between ships and passengers. The golden age of cruising brought about ships being designed with passengers in mind. They were no longer adapted after being built to fit the passenger. The passenger experience shaped the design process. Layouts reflected the time that they spent on board, movement through shared spaces, and daily rhythms at sea. The ship itself became part of the experience. Comfort became visible and intentional. During this time, dining rooms became their own kind of destination. Lounges and promenades were meant to be lingered at. Cabins were not just for shelter anymore, they were for privacy and rest. Comfort was no longer an add-on, it was built into the ship. Traveling by sea became an experience. Passengers would dress for dinner and spend time socializing. The journey was now meaningful. Crossing the ocean was no longer something to endure. It was something to participate in. There was leisure now, but it still wasn't for everyone. The experience was still shaped by class, cost, and access. Leisure entered sea travel, but it wasn't universal. The relationship between the ship and the passengers changed. Ships were no longer neutral containers. They were environments designed to be lived in. The passenger experience became central, not incidental. The industry acknowledged that how people travel mattered, not just how they arrived. The journey had its own value. Time spent at sea was no longer empty time, it was meaningful. Ships created a sense of rhythm, routine, and presence. The journey was finally part of the destination. This era set the stage for modern cruising. The design philosophy that is centered around comfort, shared spaces, and purposeful pacing became the foundation for future cruise ships. Even as cruising would continue to evolve, The core principles formed during this era would remain. As the mid-20th century approached, commercial aviation had been expanding rapidly. Long-distance travel became faster, more accessible, and less dependent on ships. Ships were no longer the most efficient way to move people across the ocean. Ocean travel had lost its original purpose. For centuries, ships existed to transport people from point A to point B. That function almost entirely was replaced by air travel. Sea travel didn't disappear, but its original purpose did. The industry now had a choice. Shipping companies could try to compete with the airlines, or they could redefine what ships were meant for. If people no longer needed ships to get to their destination, then the ships needed to become the reason for the journey. This is when leisure moved to the forefront. The framework already existed in design spaces, onboard routines, and passenger-focused environments. These elements could now be primary instead of secondary. The ship was no longer just part of the trip. It was becoming the point of it. That shift opened the door to a completely new type of cruising. Cruising had been redefined. Cruises were no longer about crossing oceans. They started to be about experiencing time at sea. Itineraries were designed around enjoyment, climate, and repeatability. Cruising became a destination-based experience rather than the means of transport. Part of the appeal was shorter voyages that spoke to a broader audience. Cruises became shorter, more affordable, and more predictable. This opened cruising to a whole new demographic. Now families, first-time travelers, and middle-class vacationers could experience life at sea. Cruising moved from a niche experience to a mainstream vacation option. Ships became floating resorts. They were now designed to entertain, feed, and house guests for days. The onboard amenities expanded because time on board is what mattered most. The ship itself became the primary environment of the vacation. Cruising became standardized. They offered predictable experiences, structured days, and clear expectations. This reliability reduced the stress of planning and travel uncertainty. Cruising succeeded because it made leisure feel manageable. This is why the cruise boom lasted. This shift didn't just change cruising. It changed how people thought about vacationing at sea. The cruise boom is where cruising found a sustainable purpose. Cruising adapted in response to pressure and developed a clear identity. Cruising no longer existed to compete with other forms of travel. It existed on its own terms. This is why the industry didn't just fade away. Leisure became the core, not the byproduct of cruising. Rest, entertainment, and routine were no longer secondary. They became the reason people booked a cruise. The experience that passengers had on board defined the entire trip. Leisure stopped being something that happened along the way and became the purpose of the journey. The cruise boom created the blueprint that today's industry is built upon. Cruising is no longer just one thing. Modern cruising is a spectrum of experiences. You can have rest-focused, adventure-focused, entertainment-focused, culture and destination-focused experiences. Cruising adapted by becoming flexible, not uniform. Today, the ship is still the primary environment and the anchor of the experience. Ships are still designed to reflect the time spent on board, the rhythm of sea days, and shared and private spaces. Even now, cruising is shaped as much by the ship as by the destination. Part of the appeal of cruising is the structure. Cruises provide predictability, clear routines, and reduced decision fatigue. That structure helps to create ease, rest, and a sense of containment. Modern cruising succeeds because it removes the friction from travel. The beauty of modern cruising is that choice has replaced necessity. People no longer cruise because they have to. They cruise because they choose to. The ocean is now the setting, not an obstacle. What was once endured has become intentional. Cruising is completely about the experience now. It's no longer defined by getting from point A to point B. It is defined by how time is spent on the journey and how the journey feels. Early in history, cruising changed because it had to. Now it's changing because transportation is no longer the point at all. Cruises aren't chosen to get somewhere, they are chosen because of how the time is spent. The value is no longer arrival, it's immersion. As cruising matured, it stopped trying to give everyone the same experience. Travelers expect choices now, not just in the destination, but in how engaged they want to be while on board. Some want activity and stimulation, while others want quiet, rhythm, and retreat. This is a broader reflection of the way people travel and how it has shaped the cruise industry. It's less about checking boxes and more about travel being aligned with personal needs. Cruising offers structure without obligation. Participation is optional and rest is built in. Cruising is adapting to travelers, not asking travelers to adapt to it. The depth of travel is becoming more important than novelty. Early cruise growth focused on destinations, more amenities, and more stimulation. Now there is a growing recognition that constant novelty creates fatigue. Too many ports reduces meaning, and too many choices creates overwhelm. Cruising is slowly shifting towards fewer places, more fully. More time on board without pressure, and itineraries that allow travelers to settle into a rhythm. Just how endurance has its limits, so does excess. Cruising is learning that meaningful experiences require space. In a world that is defined by constant connectivity, decision fatigue, speed, and noise, cruising offers something rare: containment, predictability, and permission to pause. The ocean no longer represents hardship. Instead, it represents separation from daily demands, a natural slowing of pace, and a boundary between life and leisure. What was once endured has become a place people return to for rest. Cruising has always evolved around human limits. From the beginning, sea travel was a necessity. Endurance reached its limits. Comfort became essential, then leisure became intentional. Every major shift in cruising happened when people reached the edge of what they can tolerate. The meaning of the ocean changed, not the ocean itself. The ocean remained as it always was, vast, unpredictable, and unmoved by human plans. What changed was how people related to it. Once the ocean was something to survive. Now it is a space people choose to enter intentionally. Cruising didn't conquer the ocean, it just learned how to live alongside it. Modern cruising is the result of accumulated lessons. Nothing in modern cruising appeared instantly. Every element, from the structure, comfort, rhythm, and rest, was shaped by what came before it. Modern cruising isn't separate from history, it's built from it. The history of cruising shows how a journey once endured became something people now choose with intention. Throughout its history, cruising never stood still. It began as a necessity. It demanded endurance. It learned the value of comfort. And eventually, it made space for leisure and rest. What's amazing isn't how much cruising has changed, it's why it changed. Every shift came from the same place. People reaching their limits of what travel asked of them. As ships moved more people more often and for longer periods of time, the experience of the journey could no longer be ignored. Comfort wasn't a luxury, it was a response. Leisure wasn't indulgence, it was intention. That is why cruising still exists today, not because it is efficient or novel, but because it creates a contained space where time slows, decisions fade, and the journey itself matters. In many ways, cruising didn't abandon its past. It learned from it. If you enjoyed this look at how cruising became what it is today, and you want to explore cruising in a calmer, more intentional way, then you are welcome to subscribe and join me in the next video. And remember, you can find your Ametta, your leisure, rest, and peace, wherever the tide carries you.